A car dealership manager refused to sell a luxury SUV to a black man. Then learned he owned the company. The sun sat high over Buckhead, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Atlanta, Georgia. Glass buildings reflected the afternoon glare, and the streets hummed with the quiet luxury of high-end vehicles rolling through inside Hamilton Prestige Motors, a dealership that prided itself on catering to an elite clientele. Madeline Burke stood behind the sleek mahogany desk, surveying the showroom like a queen ruling her domain. At 47 years old, Madeline had spent nearly 2 decades in luxury auto sales. She wasn't just a manager. She was the gatekeeper, ensuring that only serious buyers walked away with the keys to one of the high-end vehicles that gleamed under the showroom lights. She had an eye for class, for wealth, for who belonged and who didn't. The bell above the glass doors chimed. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, dressed in a simple navy hoodie, dark jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. His posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable. He glanced around, taking in the polished showroom floor, the lineup of gleaming luxury SUVs, and the framed awards lining the walls. Madeline took one look at him and decided everything she needed to know. Not a buyer, she turned to her sales associate Greg, who had been eyeing the man curiously. "Don't waste your time," she murmured, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "He's just looking." Greg hesitated but said nothing. They had worked together long enough to know that when Madeline made a call, no one questioned it. But the man wasn't just looking. He strolled toward a brand new 2024 Range Rover Autobiography, stopping beside the driver's side door. He ran his fingers lightly along the sleek black finish before turning to scan the showroom. His eyes locked onto Madeline. Without hesitation, he walked straight toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his tone calm, even polite. "I'm interested in that Range Rover over there. I'd like to know more about it." Madeline barely hid her sigh. She had dealt with this before. Men who wandered in, hoping to impress someone with a test drive they had no intention of following through on. She offered a tight-lipped smile. "That's a fully loaded autobiography model," she said, voice clipped. "Top-tier luxury, $165,000. The man nodded. "Sounds like what I'm looking for." Madeline folded her arms. "Are you aware of our financing options? A purchase like that requires either substantial credit or an upfront payment." The man held her gaze unreadable. "I won't need financing," she forced a polite chuckle. "I see. Well, if you're serious about purchasing, we'll need to run a soft credit check before moving forward. It's company policy." Greg shifted uneasily, glancing at Madeline. They both knew that wasn't company policy. But the man showed no reaction. No annoyance, no protest. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black card holder. "I'd like to test drive it." Madeline's expression stiffened. "We don't offer test drives on vehicles at that price point without verified proof of income," she said smoothly. "You understand?" The man's lips curved slightly, almost as if he had expected this. "Oh, I understand." But Madeline had no idea what was coming next. Greg shifted uncomfortably beside Madeline. He had seen her pull this move before, turning away potential buyers who didn't fit the image of their clientele. But something about this man's demeanor felt different. He wasn't getting defensive. He wasn't arguing, he was just watching. Madeline, however, remained firm. "I'm sorry," she said, plastering on a polite but distant smile. "But for a car of that value, we require serious inquiries only. We've had issues in the past with people wasting our time, joyriding, then walking away." The man didn't blink, joyriding. It's nothing personal, she added quickly, though the insincerity dripped from her tone. I'm sure you understand. Greg saw it then. The tiny shift in the man's expression. Just for a second. A flicker of something underneath his calm exterior. Not anger, not frustration. Something colder, sharper. But just as fast as it came. It was gone. The man exhaled through his nose, nodding slowly. All right. No test drive, got it. Madeline gave a satisfied tilt of her head. Already. Turning her attention toward a different customer. An older man in a tailored suit browsing a Bentley across the showroom. But before she could dismiss the conversation entirely, the man in the hoodie spoke again. What about cash buyers? She glanced back, mildly irritated now. Excuse me, if someone wanted to pay in full. No financing, no credit check. Would that change your test drive policy? Madeline almost laughed. People like him didn't buy six-figure cars in cash. They didn't just walk in off the street and drop that kind of money. At least not the one she expected to. I appreciate your enthusiasm, she said, voice sugary sweet. But I'm sure you can understand that we have policies in place for a reason. For the first time, a shadow of amusement crossed the man's face. I see, he said, slipping his hands into his pockets. So what would it take? Madeline's smile thinned. I just told you, she said, her patience beginning to fray. We require proof of serious intent. Our vehicles are highly sought after and we can't have. I understand, the man cut in, his voice still eerily calm. I'm just trying to figure out where the bar is. What does a serious customer look like to you? Silence for the first time. Greg saw something flicker in Madeline's expression. An almost imperceptible pause. Before she quickly masked it with a short, breathy laugh. I think we're done here, she said crisply. If you'd like to browse, feel free, but I have other customers to assist. Greg expected the man to push back, maybe even storm out. Instead, he just nodded, the corner of his mouth tugging upward in something that wasn't quite a smile. Understood. And just like that, he turned and walked away. But something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost calculating, left Greg with an uncomfortable feeling in his gut. He had a hunch Madeline had just made a mistake. Greg couldn't shake the feeling something was off. The man wasn't angry, he wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't even flustered. Instead, he carried himself like someone who had just learned something important. Like someone waiting for the perfect moment to act. Greg glanced at Madeline, who had already moved on, flashing her best smile at the suited man, eyeing the Bentley business as usual. But across the showroom, the man in the hoodie hadn't left. Instead, he was casually inspecting another vehicle. A Mercedes-Benz G-Class. Running his fingers along the chrome handle, tilting his head slightly as if admiring it. Greg watched as one of the junior salesmen, Jared, hesitated before stepping forward. Hey there, sir, Jared said, putting on his best friendly salesman grin. Need any help with that one? The man turned to face him. Expression unreadable. Yeah. Actually, I was looking at the Range Rover earlier. But I was told test drives are off limits. Unless I prove I'm serious. That true? Jared blinked. Well. I mean, before he could stumble through an answer, Madeline appeared beside him like a shadow. Her lips were still curved in that polished, professional smile, but her eyes were sharp. Jared, I'll take it from here. Jared looked like he wanted to say something. But one glance at Madeline and he backed away, disappearing toward the reception desk. The man watched the exchange with quiet amusement. You sure do keep a tight leash on your employees, he mused. Madeline didn't bite. I thought I made myself clear, She said smoothly, we cater to a specific clientele here. And we can't accommodate every request. A beat of silence, then the man chuckled softly. Shaking his head, you know. I've been to a lot of dealerships. He said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Some good, some bad. But I've never had someone work this hard to not sell me a car. Madeline's expression hardened. That's not what's happening here. No, the man tilted his head slightly. Then let's make it easy, I'll write a check right now. Full amount, no financing. No games, just business. Greg, who had been pretending not to listen, from behind the desk felt his stomach tighten. Madeline stared at the man for a long second, her fingers twitching slightly at her sides. She wasn't stupid if he really was a cash buyer. Shutting him down outright could backfire. But she wasn't convinced. And she wasn't about to be proven wrong. In front of her own team, that's a generous offer, she said, her voice silky smooth. But as I said, it's company policy. You'd need to provide documentation before we can move forward. The man held her gaze for a moment. Then slowly he pulled out his wallet, flipping it open. A black American Express Centurion card sat inside. Greg's eyes widened. Madeline didn't move. The man let the silence stretch, letting her take it in. Then he tucked the card back into his pocket. No test drive, huh? He said finally, his voice laced with something Greg couldn't quite place. Madeline lifted her chin, her professional mask still intact. I'm afraid not. The man studied her for another long beat. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. But Greg could see it. Madeline had just stepped into something she wasn't ready for. Greg could feel the weight of the silence. In the showroom, Madeline stood stiffly, her jaw set, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had just dismissed a man who had flashed a Centurion card. The kind of card only high-net-worth individuals carried, and yet she had still refused him. Greg swallowed hard. That didn't look good. Across the room, the man didn't storm out. He didn't even seem rattled. Instead, he took his time, walking past the rows of high-end cars, as if he owned the place. He ran a hand over the smooth hoods, nodding slightly to himself, almost like he was taking notes. Then the glass doors swung open. A sharply dressed man in his mid-50s, graying hair, tailored navy suit, stepped inside with an air of authority. His polished leather shoes barely made a sound. Against the tiled floor, Greg's stomach dropped. Elliot Gaines, regional director. Madeline saw him too. She straightened immediately, her entire demeanor shifting. Mr. Gaines, she greeted, her voice light, professional. What a pleasant surprise. What brings you in today? Elliot's gaze barely flicked to her. Instead, he was looking at the man in the hoodie. And then his face lit up. There he is. Elliot strode forward, hand outstretched. Jordan, I was just about to call you. Greg felt the air shift in the room. Madeline's face drained of color. The man, Jordan, finally cracked a small smile, shaking Elliot's hand with an easy familiarity. Good to see you, Elliot, he said smoothly. Was just having a look around. Elliot chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. I told you this is one of our finest locations. You'll love it here. Greg swore he saw it. Then the moment it hit Madeline, her posture was too rigid, her breath too shallow. Wait, she said, voice quieter now, more cautious. You know each other? Elliot blinked, finally turning to her. Of course. Then, with a broad grin, he gestured to Jordan. Meet Jordan Ellis, the new CEO of Hamilton Prestige Motors. The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Greg didn't move, neither did anyone else but Madeline. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Her entire body locked up. Jordan just watched her, his expression unreadable. Finally he exhaled through his nose and slid his hands into his pockets. "Miss Burke," he said evenly, "you just refused to sell a car to your new boss." The weight of those words sent a shock wave through the showroom. The employees stared, some in shock, some in poorly hidden amusement. Greg's heart pounded in his chest. He had known something was off. And Madeline, for the first time since he had met her, she looked genuinely afraid. The silence in the showroom was thick, suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Madeline blinked rapidly, her brain scrambling for footing. This had to be a mistake, a joke. The man standing before her, the man she had just humiliated, couldn't be her new CEO. And yet, Elliot had said it out loud in front of everyone. Jordan let the words settle before he spoke again. "I have to say," he mused, tilting his head slightly, "I expected to get a sense of how this dealership operates today." A pause. "I didn't expect this." Madeline's stomach twisted. She had been in sales for over 2 decades. She had handled difficult clients, high-pressure deals, VIPs who expected the world on a silver platter. But this was something else entirely. Elliot finally seemed to catch on to the tension, glancing between them. "Wait. What happened?" Jordan didn't answer right away. He let the moment stretch, watching Madeline the way a teacher watches a student about to fail a test. Then casually he turned to Greg. "What's your name?" Greg's mouth was dry. "Greg, sir." Jordan nodded. "You've been here long?" 3 years. 3 years. Jordan let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "Let me ask you something, Greg. If I walked in here today wearing a suit, speaking the exact same words I just said, would I have had to pull out my credit card just to be taken seriously?" Greg hesitated. He knew the answer. Everyone did, but saying it out loud, that could cost him his job. Jordan seemed to sense his hesitation and offered a slight nod. "You don't have to answer that." Then finally he turned back to Madeline. She had regained some of her composure, but her usual sharp confidence was gone, replaced by something else. "Something uncertain, Mr. Ellis." She started, her voice smooth, practiced the way people talk when they're trying to control the damage. "I truly apologize if there was any misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Jordan's brow lifted. "That's what you're going with?" Madeline forced a chuckle, but it fell flat. "I was simply following store policy. We have strict guidelines when it comes to test drives on luxury models. I would have handled any customer the same way." Jordan studied her, then slowly he turned toward Elliot. "Elliot," he said, tone casual, "tell me, when did Hamilton Prestige Motors start requiring a soft credit check before customers could even sit inside a car?" Elliot's brows furrowed. "We don't." The last thread of Madeline's defense snapped. Jordan let the truth settle. Watching her, he wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't throwing a scene. But somehow that was worse. Madeline's palms were damp now. And for the first time she felt it. She wasn't in control anymore. And Jordan wasn't finished.